Good morning and welcome to Coffee with Chris. So, lately I have been talking about culture and Christianity and how those things work together. And so, today I want to talk about whether or not Christianity is a counterculture. So, first, let's establish what a counterculture is. So, in sociology, the science of social interaction, there's the terminology subculture and counterculture. So, what a subculture is considered is a culture that exists within the main culture of a culture of a nation or wherever that culture may be, and that subculture is a smaller culture within that culture. So, for example, within within a culture, there might also be um, country music fans, okay, or really countryside people, right? So you've got Canada, and then you've got more rural people. That's a subculture. Rural Canadians would be a subculture within Canada. Now, a counterculture is a cultural movement, typically a form of subculture, that is intentionally and often aggressively against what the main culture is or what it stands for. So you could say that the hippie movement in the 60s was a counterculture. It wasn't typically aggressive in a violent sense, but things like protesting and things like that they did were countercultural. They were trying to change the way that the culture was. Another example might be even just things like goth music, and things like that, trying to be different from the main culture and trying to change the main culture. So subcultures are different from the main culture, but they are not attempting to change the main culture. Whereas countercultures are both different from the main culture and trying to change the main culture to be like that counterculture. And this raises the question, sometimes I've heard it put that Christianity is very countercultural. And that is true. It is countercultural in certain senses. But I think the question we need to ask ourselves when we do that is, are our differences things that stand out inherently and naturally, or are they things that stand out in such a way that we must enforce them upon the main culture? So in my last video, I mentioned how oftentimes we lament that if we had a Christian in politics, that a Christian prime minister or Christian presidents in the world, that would solve all our problems, because we would be able to make the culture adhere to the Bible. And I think sometimes in our countercultural elements, we can be trying to force the culture to adhere to the Bible, and that's very problematic. I'm not by any means saying that we should not be evangelizing. We should be evangelizing. But there's a difference between evangelizing and forcing someone to believe something. So what I'm getting at here is, Jesus talked about being in the world but not of the world. And oftentimes when we quote that verse, we quote it as saying, don't be a joiner of the mainstream culture. And the interesting thing is, Jesus didn't say, don't be of the world. He said, be in the world, but don't be of the world, And so he is asking us to be within our culture and to affect people within our culture, I think whether or not elements of Christianity are inherently countercultural or things that we would push to be countercultural, I don't think we should push that counterculture. more so, but rather than being a counterculture, rather than countering culture, I think we need to encounter culture. We need to come to culture and bless people and try and reach them. Show them how, yeah, Christianity is very different from what the world's culture is. In every culture, there's going to be elements. There's going to be elements that Christianity lines up well with, and that it is quite opposite to, you know. And so, whether it was Jesus in ancient Israel, counter to what the sort of cultural thought for the Jews were about overthrowing Rome, and that wasn't his interest, right? Instead, he was like, give to Caesar what is Caesar's. And they're like, what? You want us to pay taxes? But that was counterculture to them there, but it did line up with Rome's culture there in that instance. Of course, there was other things that just seemed so out of this world in the way that he approached things, forgiving sins and talking about truth, and he said that he was a king and everything. There was a kingdom, all these things, and so. But yeah, our main thing is to be encountering culture, going and meeting people. And I think we can spend so much time focused on how Christianity is different from our culture and how the culture needs to be like us, instead of how we need to humble ourselves and go and encounter people and wash feet, So that's my thoughts for today. I didn't write out my notes today, so it's we're all over the place. But that's kind of my final thought on this 4-part series of Christianity and culture. And so yeah, my challenge for you today is to encounter culture rather than to spend your focus on trying to be just opposite of culture. Anyways, God bless.